So we just saw that much of the socialization we experience through our families is informal. It's very subconscious. In other words, most of us probably didn't have parents that sat us down and said, "Now, Johnny, we are Republicans and here's why." Dot, dot, dot. No, most of our attitudes towards politics we pick up just by observing our parents. They're not intentionally teaching us these political opinions and beliefs. On the first question on the previous slide, for example, how interested would you say you are in politics? What we find is that children who grow up in families where politics are talked about at the dinner table, whose parents vote consistently, even parenting style, a more authoritative parenting style means kids are less likely to be interested in politics, whereas parents who encourage their children to challenge and question things and to think critically are more likely to gain the skills to participate in the political world. As you look at this list of agents of socialization, school is one that transmits political values very intentionally. When you think about schools being government institutions and government having a vested interest to ensure that kids grow up patriotic, so maybe they don't mind paying taxes or serving in the military, you see that schools are very intentional about instilling patriotism in kids from a very young age. School teaches children what it means to be an American, and they're pretty successful at it. 96% of Americans will say, "I am proud to be an American." And this value is instilled in kids through singing patriotic songs, through learning about national monuments, American history, of course, just overall developing a love of country, and of course, saying the Pledge of Allegiance every day. Your peer group can also be influential in developing your political outlook. It becomes more influential as kids begin to spend less time with their families. What we find with peers, though, is that we tend to gravitate toward those who already agree with us. So peers tend to reinforce our existing beliefs as opposed to changing them. I think we see the influence of the media manifesting today in just the distrust that people have toward our political system. Because of the drive to get good ratings, as we'll see in Chapter 7, the media tend to focus on negative aspects of politics, scandals and corruption, that sort of thing, and this tends to turn people off from the political world. Religious institutions can have an impact, especially in the formation of traditional values, which, as we'll see in a minute, tends to determine your ideology. And lastly, significant emotional events, living through something like the 9/11 terrorist attacks, or your grandparents maybe living through the Great Depression, can alter your political outlook and beliefs. So in sum, political socialization happens continuously. It's not a one-time event. So as a result of your life experiences, you have probably formed some political attitudes and beliefs, and we call this your political ideology. Very simply, this is the lens through which you view the political world. We're going to see that when liberals put on their liberal lenses, they see something completely different from conservatives when they put on their conservative lenses. A more concrete definition of political ideology, though, is a set of beliefs about politics, public policy, and the role of government. Of course, we tend to classify ideology on a scale from liberal to conservative, with liberal on the left, conservative being on the right. So if you ever hear the terms left wing or right wing, now you know what they mean. Someone who's moderate may take on aspects of each ideology, or maybe they're just not really extreme in either ideology. So I'd like to take a few minutes just to kind of break down what liberals believe and what conservatives believe, because we hear these terms thrown around a lot in our political discourse today. I've developed an acronym for you to remember what each of these terms mean. So libs, L-I-B-S. First, liberals are all about less military and foreign affairs. They want to talk things out with countries around the world that we have disputes with. They want to exhaust all diplomatic approaches before resorting to force. Liberals would want to use the military only as an absolute last resort. An example of this would be Barack Obama when he was running for office in 2008. He made the comment that he would be willing to sit down with Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad to talk out our differences. Of course, at that time, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad was known for saying things like Israel should be blown off the face of the map and The Holocaust never happened. It was created by people to generate sympathy for the Israeli people. But those kinds of comments are typical of a liberal. They want to extend a hand of friendship to the Arab world. They want to talk things out. We saw this with the deal that the Obama administration, under the leadership of Secretary of State John Kerry, negotiated with the Iranian government to slow down its nuclear development program. Based on the comments of people like Ahmadinejad, the United States thinks it would be very dangerous if Iran got its hand on a nuclear weapon. So, along with 6 other countries, the Obama administration negotiated a treaty which would slow down Iran's nuclear development program. In exchange for lifting sanctions and freeing up Iran's assets and foreign banks, the United States and other countries around the world got more access to Iran's nuclear facilities and promises that they would not continue their march toward nuclear weapons. This deal was championed as a success by liberals, saying that it would avert a possible war with Iran and avert potential nuclear holocaust. Needless to say, as we'll see in a minute, conservatives see it very differently. We saw in the first week that political conflict in part boils down to differences in values. And many times on many issues, we see individual freedom conflicting with traditional values. In that conflict, liberals always err on the side of freedom. That when the law infringes on freedom in the name of tradition, that law must be changed. So we see this on issues like gay marriage, burning the American flag, abortion, smoking marijuana. On all of these issues, you can see that tradition conflicts with individual freedom, and liberals would err on the side of individual freedom. They would say gay couples should be able to marry who they choose. Burning the American flag is protected freedom of speech. That women should have the freedom to get an abortion, and so on and so forth, even if it flies in the face of traditional values. Liberals are all about big government to promote equality. This is where we see a really stark difference between conservatives and liberals. Liberals are very, very concerned about growing income inequality in the United States, as documented on this slide. You'll see that in 2012, for example, the top 1% had about 23% of all the income in the United States. Think of income as your paycheck. Okay, top 1% have 23% of all the income. If you look at wealth, the gap is even greater. Wealth is the sum of all of your assets, everything that you own. And you see that in 2010, the top 1% had about 35% of all the wealth. Liberals look at these numbers and they are deeply concerned. Why? Well, they believe, first of all, that income inequality translates into political inequality, that increasingly those at the top are using their money to influence the political system, so government begins to work for the top 1% at the expense of everyone else. So they're speaking with a microphone in our political system, whereas the people at the bottom are barely heard above a whisper. So that's the first concern. But liberals also believe that as the economy prospers, that everyone should prosper along with it. So the solution that liberals offer to income inequality would be to tax those at the top with higher rates in order to pay for more government programs and services for the poor, for those at the bottom. When President Obama was running for office in 2008, he put it this way: if I'm sitting pretty, in other words, if I'm doing well, and then you've got a waitress who's making minimum wage plus tips and I can afford it and she can't, what's the big deal for me to pay a little bit more? That's neighborliness. Well, needless to say, conservatives would not call paying taxes neighborly. Conservatives would call paying taxes confiscation at gunpoint. It's the government holding a gun to your head saying, pay up or we'll throw you in jail. But to liberals, paying taxes is more like your patriotic duty, your way to help out your fellow American. So as liberals advocate for higher taxes, they believe this would be more revenue for the government to spend on programs and services that benefit the people at the bottom. This goes along with the last letter here, solving society's problems with government. Liberals are always advocating government solutions. We see this most prominently right now as members of Congress are debating what to do about healthcare. Liberals believe that unless the government is providing healthcare, people are going to fall through the cracks. You're going to have people with pre-existing conditions that can't get covered. You're going to have people who have treatable diseases who can't get their foot in the door of a doctor's office, and they end up dying simply because they don't have access to healthcare. So liberals believe that unless the government is providing whatever service we're talking about, people aren't going to get covered. And that's true whether we're talking about healthcare, education, retirement for older adults. Liberals are always advocating for government solutions. And they do this because they believe that it would remedy inequality. Now on to conservatives. The conservative icon is Ronald Reagan. You often hear conservatives wishing that Ronald Reagan was still around, that there would be another candidate who would emerge comparable to Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan made a name for himself in conservatism by saying things like, "The government is the problem, it's not the solution." Or, "The most terrifying words in the English language are, I'm the government and I'm here to help." So in conservative rhetoric, you get the sense that there's a lot of distrust for government. As a result, conservatives want to shrink the size of government. They want to constrain government, get government out of people's way, give individuals the freedom to get ahead on their own without government interference. So what does this mean? It generally means lower taxes across the board, but even on the wealthy. As I mentioned, conservatives don't view taxes as being neighborly or patriotic. Conservatives see taxes as stifling economic growth. Conservatives believe that if you tax people at a higher rate simply because they've done well for themselves, that it punishes their hard work and success, that it takes away any incentive that people have to do well for themselves. And so you see this in Donald Trump's tax proposal, that he wants to cut taxes on people who are at the top. Conservatives tend to believe that cutting taxes for people at the top will have a trickle-down effect and help people at the bottom. As a result, conservatives are always offering private sector solutions, whether we're talking about healthcare or education or retirement programs for seniors. Conservatives want solutions that get the government out of it. Now, oftentimes this is seen as heartless, or, that conservatives don't care, for example, that people are dying of treatable diseases because they can't get their foot in the door of a doctor's office. In the 2010 health care debate before Obamacare was passed, for example, a Democratic representative from Florida named Alan Grayson, he gets up on the House floor with two posters. He said, "Here's the Republican health care plan." The first poster said, "Don't get sick." Put it down. The second poster said, "If you get sick, die quickly." So that's a liberal characterizing how a conservative might view an issue like health care. That, it seems like they just don't care that people aren't getting help that they need. It's not that conservatives don't care, it's just that they don't want it to be the government's job to solve everyone's problems. They're all about individual responsibility. So if people work hard and get a good education, get a good job, then they'll have access to health care. It's not the government's responsibility to provide it. They're all about private organizations like the Red Cross or the Salvation Army reaching out and helping the poor and the needy, not the government. They see a much limited role for the government. Conservatives love to point out that they believe the wealthy are already paying their fair share. We went into this discussion saying that liberals and conservatives view the world very differently. Well, this is how conservatives view the world. What this chart is showing you is the proportion of all federal income taxes paid by people in different income brackets. And you see that the top 1% paid 40% of all the income taxes collected by the federal government. The top 5% of wage earners paid 60% of all the taxes collected by the federal government. So again, conservatives would say the wealthy are already paying their fair share. Let's not punish them with even higher taxes. Conservatives are all about traditional values, promoting traditional values. We saw this in Donald Trump last year when he said that he believes burning the American flag should be punished by fines and maybe even a year in jail. That statement reflects his support of traditional values over individual freedom. In that case, traditional value being patriotism and protecting the revered status of the flag, even if it means taking away freedom of speech. Lastly, conservatives are all about strong defense. They're strong on law enforcement. They're always advocating more military and foreign affairs. Again, we have seen this play out in the Trump administration, whereas Barack Obama was very reluctant to get the military involved in the civil war in Syria. Donald Trump, when the Syrian president Bashar al-Assad unleashed chemical weapons on his own people, Donald Trump was greatly disturbed by the images of children foaming at the mouth and gasping for air after this chemical attack, and as a result, he unleashed 59 Tomahawk missiles targeted at a Syrian airbase. So conservatives are much more willing to engage the military. Donald Trump further has said that he's willing to go at it alone if the North Korean government poses a significant threat to the security of the United States. He's willing to engage the military to act. So this is the one area that conservatives actually want more government spending, and that would be on defense. So as you just listen to the differences in liberals and conservatives, it's very likely that maybe you didn't find yourself agreeing with either 100%. So there's a two-dimensional way of looking at ideology depending on where you stand on social and economic issues. Economic issues are all of those that involve raising taxes to spend money on more government programs and services. Social issues involve everything else. These are the issues that pit individual freedom against traditional values, issues like legalizing marijuana use or euthanasia, physician-assisted suicide, abortion, gay marriage, you name it. Okay, those are the social issues. They don't involve spending any money or raising taxes, but they involve a conflict between values. So when you break it down, if you want more government on economic issues to promote equality and equal access to programs and services, but then you want less government on social issues, that means on social issues you're going to err on the side of individual freedom, that makes you a liberal. A conservative, if you can read this chart, wants less government on economic issues, so individual freedom to keep their money as they choose, which means lower taxes. But then conservatives actually want more government on social issues to promote traditional values. That places you in the camp of a conservative. If you want less government all around, that makes you a libertarian. Libertarians want less government on economic issues, which means lower taxes, less government programs and services. But they also want less government on social issues, which means that libertarians tend to favor individual freedom on issues like legalizing marijuana, abortion, gay marriage, you name it. Populists want more government all around. They advocate higher taxes for more government programs on the economic dimension, but then on social issues, they want more government to promote traditional values. By the way, contrary to what you might think, Donald Trump fits more along populist ideology than he would conservative ideology. When you look at his rhetoric and the things that he proposes, Donald Trump really is not about shrinking the size of government, limiting government spending. In many cases, he wants more government spending, and he also wants to promote traditional values.